The venue was everything Jessica had dreamed of. An upscale restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, the golden hues of sunset casting an ethereal glow on crystal chandeliers. Laughter and the soft clinking of glasses filled the room, mingling with the faint notes of a live jazz band tucked in the corner. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered, dressed in their finest, buzzing with energy and admiration for the woman of the hour. Jessica was radiant. Her crimson dress hugged her curves perfectly, her makeup impeccable, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the confident gleam in her eyes. She thrived on the attention, effortlessly floating from one group to another, her laughter like polished glass, bright, beautiful but brittle beneath the surface. Michael watched her from across the room, his glass of bourbon untouched, fingers resting lightly on the condensation. His tall frame was relaxed, dressed in a sharp navy suit that exuded quiet authority. He played his role to perfection, the doting, supportive boyfriend, his smiles warm, his compliments genuine, or so they appeared. Inside, though, Michael was ice. He'd known for weeks. The late-night texts Jessica claimed were from her colleague, the sudden weekend work retreats, the faint trace of cologne unfamiliar to his own. He had suspected, but Michael wasn't a man of impulse. He was a man of precision, of strategy. Instead of confronting her with accusations, he had become a silent observer, gathering evidence like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Steady hands, sharp tools. A USB drive tucked neatly in his jacket pocket carried the weight of his heartbreak. Screenshots of flirtatious messages, candid photos Jessica didn't know had been taken, even audio clips from conversations too damning to ignore. Proof. Not for himself, he didn't need it, but for everyone else. For Jessica's carefully curated world of admirers and enablers. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Toasts were made, stories shared, laughter echoing against the polished walls. Michael moved through it all with effortless charm, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, even stealing moments of affection with Jessica. She was oblivious, drunk on her own deceit, her confidence blinding her to the storm gathering right in front of her. As the night reached its peak, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the next part of the celebration: speeches. Jessica's best friend took the microphone first, delivering a glowing tribute filled with inside jokes and heartfelt anecdotes. The crowd applauded warmly, some dabbing at the corners of their eyes. Then, it was Michael's turn. He rose slowly, his chair scraping softly against the polished floor, a sound that seemed louder in the sudden hush that followed. All eyes turned to him, expecting words of adoration, a romantic gesture befitting the perfect couple they believed them to be. Michael smiled, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Jessica, who looked up at him with a gleam of pride, and perhaps a flicker of arrogance. He lifted his glass. "To Jessica," he began, his voice steady, warm even. "The woman who stole my heart and kept secrets I never saw coming." A ripple of confused laughter. Jessica's smile faltered, just slightly. Michael continued, his tone light, conversational, but his words cutting sharper with each sentence. "Tonight, I wanted to give you something special, not just words, but the truth." He reached into his jacket, pulling out the small USB drive, holding it up like a token. The room grew still. Jessica's smile had vanished completely, her posture stiffening. Michael turned toward the projector already set up for the party's slideshow, a detail Jessica had arranged herself, never imagining it would be hijacked for her own downfall. As the first image flashed on the screen, Jessica and Ryan, her lover, laughing intimately in a photo she didn't know existed. The room erupted in gasps and whispers, and Michael stood there, the eye of the storm, calm and composed, as Jessica's perfect world began to shatter. Silence hung in the air for a beat too long, thick and suffocating. The image on the screen, a candid photo of Jessica with Ryan, her hand casually resting on his chest, her eyes lit with a warmth Michael hadn't seen directed at him in months, burned into the minds of everyone present. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the festive energy vanished, replaced by an uneasy quiet broken only by faint murmurs. Jessica's face drained of color. Her confident, charismatic facade crumbled in real time. She shifted in her seat, her once poised posture slumping slightly, her eyes darting from Michael to the screen and back again, as if searching for an explanation, an escape, a loophole in this reality. But there was none. The truth was laid bare, pixel by pixel. Michael's voice sliced through the tension, steady and controlled. Funny how pictures capture more than just moments. They tell stories. Stories people think they've hidden well. He clicked the remote again. Another photo appeared. This time, Jessica and Ryan were seated in a dimly lit restaurant, their heads close, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of his glass. The timestamp in the corner was from the same night Jessica had claimed she was working late on a project for her firm. A collective inhale swept through the crowd. Jessica's parents exchanged glances, her mother's hand clutching at her pearl necklace like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. Friends, colleagues, faces Jessica had meticulously kept charmed, now stared at her with disbelief. Their whispered conversations growing louder, fueled by shock and intrigue. Michael didn't flinch. He let the images roll. Texts displayed like damning exhibits in a courtroom. Flirtatious messages, plans for secret getaways, private jokes shared at his expense. His hand never trembled. His voice never wavered. Each word he spoke was measured, deliberate. A controlled demolition of the life Jessica thought she had under control. Jessica shot up from her chair suddenly, her voice shaky but laced with desperate bravado. "Michael, what the hell are you doing?" The room went deathly quiet again, all eyes snapping between the two. Michael slowly turned his gaze to her, the warmth she once knew now replaced by something colder, sharper. "Oh, just giving you the attention you clearly crave, Jess," he replied smoothly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Consider this your spotlight." She opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off with a simple hand gesture, a dismissive flick of his fingers that stung more than words. He turned back to the crowd. "For those of you wondering why I chose tonight, well, it's Jessica's special day. I figured she'd appreciate a memorable moment, something heartfelt." A few guests stifled awkward laughs, the tension fracturing into jagged pieces. Jessica's facade cracked further. She tried to laugh it off, to regain control, but her voice was brittle, hollow. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, glancing around as if daring someone to defend her. No one did. And then Michael delivered the final blow. "Oh, before I forget," he said, pulling out an envelope from his inside pocket. The same envelope that had sat hidden in his desk drawer for weeks. He held it up. "This contains the lease agreement for the apartment Jessica's been sharing with Ryan. Guess she forgot I'm the one who handles our finances. Funny how careless people get when they think they're untouchable." Jessica's face crumpled. Her carefully constructed world, built on charm, lies, and manipulation, collapsed under the weight of Michael's quiet, methodical revenge. Michael stepped back from the microphone, placed it gently on the table, and walked toward the exit without looking back. The party was over. But the real aftermath was just beginning. The door swung shut behind Michael with a soft thud, but inside the lavish venue the sound reverberated like a cannon shot. The silence he left behind was thick, suffocating, punctuated only by the faint hum of the projector still flickering with damning evidence. Jessica stood frozen, her face pale beneath the harsh lights. Her party dress, once a symbol of confidence, now felt like a gaudy costume, a reminder of the role she had played too well. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths as the reality settled in. Her carefully crafted world had just collapsed, not in private, but in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. Ryan made the first move. He stepped forward, attempting a feeble display of damage control, his voice low and brittle with forced charm. "Look, everyone, this is all blown out of proportion. You know how these things—" "Shut up, Ryan!" Jessica hissed, her voice a venomous whip, but the crowd wasn't listening to him. The murmurs had grown louder, shifting from shock to judgment, their eyes dissecting Jessica, stripping away every layer of pretense. Friends she'd gossiped with, colleagues she'd charmed, even family members. All of them looking at her like they'd never really seen her before. Her mother was the first to stand, her face etched with disappointment. "Jessica," she whispered, shaking her head as she turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing with quiet finality. That broke the spell. Guests began to shuffle, their polite masks slipping. Some followed Jessica's mother, others lingered out of morbid curiosity, their eyes sharp, hungry for the spectacle. The room that had once been filled with admiration for Jessica now brimmed with something colder. Pity, disdain, and a satisfaction that only comes from watching the mighty fall. Jessica's hands trembled as she reached for a champagne glass, but it slipped through her fingers, shattering on the floor. The sharp crack mirrored the fracture lines running through her composure. "Birds," she spat, glaring at the guests. "All of you. You loved me when I was perfect, now you're just vultures. Ryan reached for her arm, trying to usher her away from the wreckage, but she yanked herself free with a snarl. Don't touch me, this is your fault. His face twisted with indignation. My fault? You're the one who couldn't keep it discreet. The argument spilled into the room, raw and exposed. Whatever facade they'd maintained in secret unraveled completely. Their voices rising, accusations flying like daggers, but no one cared to mediate. The audience was gone, leaving them to drown in the mess they'd created. Outside, Michael walked down the street, the cool night air filling his lungs like a balm. He didn't look back, not because he didn't care, but because he'd already won. His revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, surgical, leaving Jessica to crumble under the weight of her own lies. And that was the most satisfying part of all. The night outside was cold, but Michael felt nothing. The adrenaline that had fueled his composure inside the venue had begun to wane, leaving behind a hollow ache in his chest. Each step he took away from the scene of Jessica's public unmasking felt heavier than the last. He wasn't sure if it was relief, grief, or some tangled mixture of both pressing down on him. The city lights blurred slightly as he walked, his mind replaying the speech, the gasps, the look on Jessica's face. Shocked, humiliated, betrayed by the very person she thought was too weak to confront her. There had been a moment, just a flicker of hesitation, when he'd looked into her eyes before exposing everything. A memory flashed. Her laughter on lazy Sunday mornings, the warmth of her hand in his, the quiet intimacy they once shared. But that moment passed quickly, crushed under the weight of the betrayal she had layered over their life like paint on rotting wood. Michael didn't go home. The apartment they'd shared felt tainted now, a shrine to a relationship that had never really existed. Instead, he found himself at a small, dimly lit bar on the edge of the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions and no one cared who you were. The bartender poured him a glass of whiskey without a word. Michael sat in the corner, staring at the amber liquid, its stillness mocking the storm in his chest. For the first time since discovering Jessica's affair, he allowed himself to feel. Not just the anger and betrayal, but the deep, aching sadness beneath it all. He had loved her. Maybe he still did, in some twisted, residual way. That was the cruelest part of it. Meanwhile, back at the venue, the aftermath of Michael's revelation was still unfolding. Jessica sat alone at a table now littered with half-empty glasses and crumpled napkins, remnants of a celebration that had turned into her personal nightmare. The crowd had thinned. Even Ryan had disappeared after their heated argument, his cowardice finally overriding his arrogance. Jessica's phone buzzed, messages from friends trying to offer thin words of support, others filled with silent judgment disguised as concern. She didn't respond. What could she say? That it was all a misunderstanding? That Michael had exaggerated? The evidence had been irrefutable, displayed like an exhibit in a courtroom where she was both the defendant and the guilty verdict. The silence was deafening. In her mind she replayed the party's final moments, Michael's steady voice, the damning images, the whispered gasps. She realized, with a sick twist in her gut, that it wasn't just the affair that had destroyed her. It was Michael's calmness, his surgical precision in dismantling her lies. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't begged. He had simply shown the truth, letting it speak louder than any rage could. That was the deepest cut. Across the city, Michael's phone buzzed too, messages from mutual friends, curious, scandal-hungry. He ignored them all, until one appeared from someone unexpected. Lily, Jessica's so-called best friend. "I'm sorry, Michael. I knew I should have told you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Michael stared at the message, the irony bitter in his mouth. Another betrayal hidden beneath layers of friendship and loyalty. But this time, it didn't sting. It was just confirmation of what he'd already learned. People wear masks. Some just fit better than others. He finished his drink, the warmth of the whiskey a weak comfort, and stepped back into the night. The past was behind him, ashes of a fire he'd lit himself. Now it was time to rebuild. The morning after the party felt eerily quiet. The storm had passed, but the wreckage remained. Michael woke up in his own apartment, though it no longer felt like home. The bed was cold, the air stale with the absence of Jessica's perfume, the silence stretched, unfamiliar and oppressive. He hadn't slept much. How could he? The night kept replaying in his mind. The way the guests had gasped, the way Jessica had crumbled, the weight of the truth finally dragging her down. He checked his phone. Dozens of missed calls and unread messages, some from mutual friends, some from Jessica. He ignored all of them, except for one. his landlord. "Hey Michael, got your email, we'll finalize the lease transfer by the end of the month. Let me know if you need anything." He exhaled, a slow, steady release of something heavy. He had made the decision in the early hours of the morning. He couldn't stay in this place anymore. The apartment had been theirs. Every room carried echoes of laughter that now felt artificial, memories that had been tainted by lies. A fresh start was necessary, not just wanted. A sharp knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He already knew who it was before he opened it. Jessica? She stood there, dressed in casual jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the polished woman at the party the night before. Her face was stripped of makeup, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked smaller, like the weight of her exposed lies had physically diminished her. "Michael," she started, her voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" Michael studied her for a moment before stepping aside. He wouldn't slam the door in her face, that wasn't his style. He had already won. Jessica walked in cautiously, as if the space itself had turned hostile. She folded her arms, hugging herself, searching for words. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said, looking at him with something between sorrow and anger. Michael let out a hollow laugh. "Didn't have to? Jessica, I gave you every chance to be honest with me. You made your choices." She flinched but quickly recovered. I was going to tell you," she said weakly. "No, you weren't," Michael cut in, shaking his head. "You were going to keep lying, keep pretending. You weren't sorry about what you did. You were just sorry you got caught." Jessica looked away, ashamed but still unwilling to fully surrender. "I don't know why I did it," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't that I didn't love you." Michael felt a sharp pang, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he nodded. "Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. It doesn't matter now." Jessica's breath hitched. "Are you really just going to walk away? After everything?" He let out a slow breath, staring at her. This woman he had once loved, trusted, envisioned a future with. And now, she was just someone he used to know. "I already did," he said simply. Jessica's lips trembled. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. Not the fear of humiliation, but the fear of losing him completely. Of knowing she had gambled and lost. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. After a moment, she nodded, acceptance, or perhaps resignation. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. Michael didn't close it immediately. He stood there, watching her disappear down the hallway, feeling the weight of finality settle over him. It was over.